welcome to WGD Weekly. As always, my name is Steve, and with me is my tag team partner, the one and only CG Scum. What's going on today, brother?
Pretty excited, Steve. I think we both are. We got a pretty big guest lined up for our listeners and the followers of WGD today.
We're going to go 1,000,000 miles an hour. This next hour is going to fly by. With us this week is Precious Paul Ellering from the Legion of Doom, the legendary Road Warriors, the WWE Hall of Famer. He's going to take a few moments out of his busy day running his bar, and the bar's name is the Rock Tavern in Gray Eagle, Minnesota. If you're up that way, please stop by. They're right on the lake. I hear it's a very beautiful place. They always have live music in the summer. Paul Ellering, Scum. It can't get any bigger than that.
No, WWE Hall of Famer. You don't get much more decorated than that in the world of professional wrestling. So I know growing up, I was a big fan. And one of the first introduction I had to professional wrestling was Saturday nights, the Superstation, the Legion of Doom. So, I mean, I'm really excited to have him on here.
His daughter, Rachel, has been a fan of our page and a follower of our page for quite some time, and I was able to make contact with her about a week ago. She has been exceptionally gracious in this whole thing, very helpful and very accommodating. So I want to take a moment to say thank you to her. She's been wonderful, a huge help. She's heading down to Florida next weekend for Powerlifting Raw National. So we want to wish her the best of luck with that. Precious Paul Ellering joining us very momentarily here on WGD Weekly with Steve and the Scum. It's been a very ironic week for managers, for classic managers. It was our Hall of Fame elections this week. Bobby the Brain Heenan and the Mouth of the South Jimmy Hart are our first inductees into the manager's wing of the WGD Hall of Fame. I actually got a vote for Bobby Heenan and Jim Cornette, and this was prior to knowing about Precious Paul Ellering, so I certainly feel bad, and I hope he doesn't take it out on us too severely when he hears. I know that I would be willing to bet that you voted for Bobby Heenan, and knowing you're a fan of Andy Kaufman, I would be willing to bet you voted for Classy Freddie Blassie. Am I not correct?
I did wind up going with Heenan and Blassie. Again, Ellering, even prior to knowing that he was going to be on, was definitely one I considered. You know, Jimmy Hart also, I mean, who actually got the honor. But either way, I think it's inevitable each of those guys, as the balloting continues and the Glory Days Hall of Fame expands, I think that you'll see Jimmy Hart, Paul Ellering, I think Captain Lou Albano. There's a few no-brainers there.
Certainly. You look back at classic wrestling, and certainly the 80s and early into the 90s, and even the late 70s, if you're old enough to follow, was the era of the manager. The manager had a great role in getting their clients to be a little bit more recognized, and I don't think anybody to the person, barring maybe Bobby Heenan, and that certainly can be debatable. If you think about Brain, the person, and I know Bobby Heenan, his nickname is the Brain, but if you really think about a strategist, told you how it was going to be Paul Ellering. He managed the Road Warriors. This is the biggest tag team maybe ever in the history of wrestling. Certainly has my vote as the greatest tag team to ever walk down the aisle. The most dominating tag team in any era, and certainly to this day, someone that people still love. Like I say, we were on Wrestling's Glory Days on Facebook, and what more quintessential group of classic wrestlers are the Legion of Doom, the Road Warriors, led by Precious Paul Ellering. It's something that we've all been looking forward to here all week long. As soon as we got the news, I know you and I were very, very excited. We've been fans together for over 30 years, and this is something that has culminated very quickly, and I am extremely excited. He's joining us momentarily, Precious Paul Ellering. Thank you so much for joining us at WGD Weekly with Steve and the Scum. Very, very soon we're going to have Paul Ellering on the line. We're going to ask him a bunch of questions. We're going to get to the bottom of a lot of maybe rumors and myths of the classic wrestling era in the 80s. We're going to talk about the War Games. We're going to talk about his start. We're going to talk about quite a few things, and I don't want to give it all away because he is going to join us very, very soon. Scum, while we're on the subject, who do you think of when you think of strategist?
Well, I didn't want to cut you off there, Steve, but I was going to jump in when you were talking about and the analogy there between him and Bobby Heenan, who called himself the Brain. This is a man who synonymously, I mean, any wrestling fan who's familiar with Precious Paul Ellering, you never see the guy without a rolled-up copy of the Wall Street Journal. I mean, Right there. I mean, that speaks to the man's intelligence to say what you will. I mean, as far as I can remember, I don't remember anyone else bringing their daily newspaper with them to ringside.
Our special guest is with us now, a WWE Hall of Famer, and of course the owner of the Rock Tavern in Gray Eagle, Minnesota. WWE Hall of Famer Precious Paul Ellering is with us today at WGD Weekly. Mr. Ellering, how are we doing this evening?
We're doing good. Sitting up here at Big Birch Lake in Minnesota, looking at the lake, and you guys are in Georgia, and I'm not.
Well, I think we're going to envy you because you got that nice lake breeze. I know myself and the Scum come from a nice little town in upstate New York right on Lake Ontario, so we certainly envy that breeze and we envy that peace and quiet. We don't want to keep you too long, so we're going to jump right in. And I wanted to ask you the first question. As prior to your days as a wrestler, you were a power lifter where you had actually set a world record in the deadlift, if I'm not mistaken. After this, you began training with Eddie Sharkey and Vern Gagne for a career in the ring.
No, I never trained with Eddie Sharkey. It was just Vern Gagne. I know Eddie Sharkey, but I broke in with Vern.
Immediately dispelling some of the myths online. We really, really appreciate that. You have to do some research, and every now and then you find some stuff online that isn't correct, so thanks for clearing the air with that. Is there something that you really wanted to do? You wanted to get into professional wrestling, or was there a specific motivation that actually led you there?
Well, I was actually in college at the time, and I was lifting weights in the collegiate nationals and then on the national level, and I got invited to a sports banquet. And Vern was at the sports banquet, and he always really liked people that had a wrestling background, and we just got talking, and I said, well, I had wrestled in high school, and I still had another year of college, and he said, well, you know, if you're ever interested in wrestling, you know, give me a call, and we'll see what we can do. And after I graduated from college, I actually decided to get into the gym business. So I took my dad down to a gym that was for sale in Omaha, Nebraska, and we're driving back, and I had my student loans, and I, you know, looking at the gym was for sale at that time for $60,000, and I just in talking with my dad and trying to figure life out at that time, I said maybe I should just give this wrestling thing a try and save some money and then get into the gym business. So I gave Vern a call, and he said, come on in. We just started a camp. We got 35 guys going, and if you make it, you make it. If you don't, you don't. And out of that camp, 2 of us made it. No, 3 of us. 3 of us made it. And that was it.
That's some incredible stuff. And correct me if I'm wrong, I believe it was yourself and Barry O was the other person, or Steve O. I always forget, I confuse the two sometimes, I think.
No, Steve O was ahead of me. His brother, Ron Olsenowski, was in my camp, and then another wrestler by the name of Evan Johnson. He actually wrestled for the U of M, and but he had a huge aeronautical engineering degree, and he wrestled for about 2 or 3 years, and he just didn't like life on the road, and then he quit after that. So out of that class, I was the only one that went on.
And certainly a legendary Hall of Fame career. Your in-ring career begins, and you work for Vern first. You spend time with Bill Watson Mid-South, Jerry Jarrett in Memphis, and then you make the jump to Georgia Championship Wrestling. There was a knee injury, effectively putting an end to your in-ring career. I know that you had spent some time in the ring thereafter, but sporadically. There was a decision there to be made to turn you into a manager. My next question would be, while you were an in-ring performer, who is your favorite or some of your favorite competitors to work with? And second, on the heels of the injury, who made the call that says Precious Paul Ellering can still bring something to the table here, and let's keep him as a manager?
Well, yeah, there were a couple surgeries in there. I was wrestling Robert Gibson in Columbus, Georgia, and I blew my knee out there. It just happened to be that Dr. Jimmy Andrews was in Columbus, Georgia at that time, and so I went and saw him, and he fixed me up, and then right after that he moved to Birmingham, now he's probably the highest profile orthopedic surgeon that there is. And he operated on me 3 times, but he operates on, every pro football player and baseball player around. And so what happened was I went back and I rehabbed in Louisiana, and I ruptured my patella tendon. That takes about 6 months. And I built it back, and I came back after about 8 months, and Ole Anderson was booking then for Jim Barnett in Atlanta, and he said, and I got in the ring and I wrestled a little bit, and I was probably 90%, which is pretty good. 90% of me is pretty awesome. And he said, you're really good on the mic. Did you ever think of managing? And I actually, when I was in wrestling training camp at Burns there, I had a premonition dream that my forte in the business was going to be as a manager. And when he said that, I just said, you're not going to believe this, but I had a dream about this, like 6 years ago, that this is what I was meant to do. And so he said, well, you're really good on the mic, you're good in the ring, and even as a manager, you got to have a good timing and be able to, know what's going on and stuff. And so I just started managing it, and then we created the Legion of Doom, and there were probably 6, 7 guys into the Legion of Doom at that time. And then Animal and Hawk came in, and they were Minnesota boys at that time, and so we had that connection. Plus, they were big into weightlifting, and they knew my background from powerlifting, and so we had that connection. And so we worked with Turner and Crockett, and the Legion of Doom being a big group. At that time, the business was transitioning with the cable TV and the wrestling war between Turner and Vern and Vince. So I told the guys, I said, I can get us back into Minnesota AWA because, I got a real good foot in the door there with Vern, and they wanted to come back here and into the Midwest, and so I called Vern up and we cut a deal, and it worked out good for us because our best deal at that time was we had Japan in our back pocket. So we wanted to just be independent and work with everybody, keeping Japan as our number one deal. So that's what we did for 3-4 years. We always kept Japan separate, and then we worked with Vern, and then we also worked with Crockett at that time. So we worked all over the United States or Puerto Rico or whatever, and then and that's where we were in the 80s.
I wanted to just make quick mention. You mentioned Dr. James Andrews, who is probably most well known for innovating Tommy John surgery, and as you mentioned, all the baseball players and football players. I wanted to tag in my partner here, Chris. He had a couple of questions he wanted to ask. You had mentioned 6 or 7 members of the Legion of Doom. I know he had a specific question regarding that, so I'm going to turn the table over to my partner, the Scum, here, and he's going to have you a couple questions. I appreciate your time. Paul Ellering with us at WGD Weekly. Scum, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Paul,
is your middle name Bag?
Well, it depends on who you talk to, I suppose, right?
I don't know.
Yeah. So anyway, it was ironic that you would bring up the Legion of Doom. That was where I was heading here next in Georgia Championship Wrestling. Personally, myself, that was some of the first wrestling that I ever watched when I was younger, when you were managing the Legion of Doom. Now, I remember that along with Hawk and Animal, you had managed Jake the Snake Roberts, a spoiler. If I'm not mistaken, King Kong Bundy was briefly involved in the group. I've seen, doing a little homework before we were going to have you here on the show, that there were some other guys that you had managed down there that I remember, but maybe was a little before my time. Mad Dog Buzz Sawyer, the Iron Sheik. I've seen Arn Anderson was with you at one point. Is that correct? And even the original.
Yeah, Matt Bourne. He's that clown, the dunk guy.
Yeah. So I guess what I was getting at, what I was wondering, obviously Hawk and Animal and you had a great relationship. Outside of the Road Warriors, who were some of your favorites to represent as a manager, either on camera and travel or spend time with outside of the ring?
Well, yeah, I was very fortunate, blessed to be around a lot of really great athletes and a lot of good people. One of my favorite people, and he's still in the business, is Arn Anderson. I was there when he started, and he's just a really class guy. And I managed him, and the spoiler was very interesting. I like Buzz, but Buzz was a little different. And Animal and Hawk and we ended up being like the three musketeers. There was one for all and all for one. And we just we had a great working relationship. They trusted me, and I just let them do what they wanted to do in the ring, and took care of the business side of it. And the good Lord blessed us, being in the right place at the right time with the right gimmick, and it got to be where we were the greatest team of our time, and we ended up being the greatest tag team of all time. And the proof is in the pudding. We were the only tag team to hold the international title, the AWA, the NWA, and the WWF title. And no other tag team has ever done that. And we had a great run, and the business was good to us, and I really respect all the fans out there that backed us, and that means a lot to me now.
Sure. Well, you would get no argument from either of us here that the Road Warriors were the greatest tag team of all time. That's for sure. I guess moving along, you also brought up that you guys, shortly after you jumped over due to your relationship with Vern, back to the AWA. Now, it seemed like you guys went there and you came in that you were pretty much the tag champs almost right after you came in there. You held the titles for around a year, and then it seemed like shortly thereafter you were back with Crockett. Was there, I think you explained that the initial jump to AWA came from your relationship to Vern, but after dropping the titles, was there any reasoning behind the quick jump back to Crockett?
Well, you see, I looked at the Road Warriors, and I said, the Road Warriors are like Andre the Giant. They are a huge attraction. And for us to stay in any one spot too long, I felt like we would be staying too long. And you don't want to overextend your welcome. And for us to come in, make a big splash, that's what we should do. That's the way we should promote ourselves. So I said, we got Japan in our back pocket. And that was our number one deal from about 84 to 87, 88. It was always Japan, number one. So we took a calendar out and we figured out, okay, we got to be in Japan, here, and here. And I said, let's work with Vern here, and let's also work with Crockett. And we would have worked with Vince, but Vince only wanted to lock guys up. So he, essentially he just shut himself out at that point. And that was good for him. That's the way he wanted to run his business. And so we worked with Japan number one, Vern number two, and then Crockett. And after a year, then we signed a 3-year deal with Crockett, keeping Japan in our back pocket yet. So we wanted to be an attraction, to go from, just to go all over, not wrestle in one spot all the time. Because you see too much of one thing, it wears it out, especially with the style of wrestling that we had. So that's what we did, and I saw that, and that's why I wanted to promote us.
This brings up a pretty good point. You said you signed a 3-year deal with Crockett, and I think this brings us to maybe one of the more memorable time frames in NWA history as far as growing up in the 80s with the Road Warriors, Dusty, Nikita Koloff, the Four Horsemen, one of the best feuds, the greatest feuds of all time, leading into the War Games, and just some really fantastic stuff that has held up against the test of time and would work in any era. Take us through that feud and working with a group of all legends and Hall of Famers leading up and surrounding the introduction of the War Games. And if you can recall, bring us up to speed on how this feud and the double ring and the double cage matches actually came into fruition.
Well, you know, when you got that many great athletes and that many good business minds, good things happen. And every one of them lifted the opposing person up higher. You know, we kept raising the bar, and eventually it became the War Games. You know, just trying to find something more spectacular, at least once a month, and you know, Dusty would make everybody better, and we would make everybody better, and the Four Horsemen, just being great athletes and just tremendous talent. You dig down into, you know, what you got to do to you know, perform and to raise the bar, and that's what happened. And it was a heck of a run, and those matches, you know, they're down in the annals of wrestling history as probably some of the greatest matches of all time. Tremendous chemistry, tremendous contrast in styles and interviews, and you put that all together, and it's just unbelievable. It's like Muhammad Ali and Joe Frazier, two different styles, two different people, and you always have to have a rematch. And Ali fought Frazier 3 times, and you know, we fought the Four Horsemen and J.J. Dillon there, you know, many times, and that's just what happens when you got a lot of talent and great athletes and smart minds all sitting down and creating something that's huge, you know, unique.
Very good. Paul, not to backtrack a little bit chronologically here, but with the talk of the War Game cage matches, I can't help being reminded of another legendary cage match you had a big hand in. The match was the last Battle of Atlanta. You were with Bad Doug Buzz Sawyer. It was the culmination of a brutal feud between him and Tommy Rich. You were actually in the smaller cage on top of the one that they were competing in. I bring this up just because it's come up at the Wrestling Glory Days forum several times, and for whatever reason, it seems there's no physical evidence or footage of this match existing. I was just wondering, what do you recall of that match? And do you know of any reason how or why there wouldn't be any available footage of that?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know why there isn't, but I remember it was a brutal match. Buzz and Tommy just battled. I'm sure the match was 30 minutes, and it was back and forth, and Tommy would never give up, and Buzz was just, he was just a pit bull, you know, and he'd just fight until he couldn't no more, and Tommy, he'd back up and he'd wear Buzz down, and when Buzz would get tired, then Tommy, that's why he was called a wildfire, you know, he would dig down, he had that deep reserve of fire, and he'd come blasting back, and it was a tremendous match. I remember it was a bloodbath. There was blood everywhere, and one of the greatest matches of all time for sure. And 2 young guys, and just giving it their all in the ring. It was just unbelievable. And then of course thereafter that I had to wrestle Ole Anderson, and of course, I beat him up, quote unquote. It was long. It was a long match, you know, at that time for me, 20 minutes against Ole. And, you know, Ole would never back up, and he'd just grind, and he'd use the ropes, and it was old school wrestling, and there again, there was blood everywhere, and of course, I was left laying, and Ole walked out of the ring. And that's the way it ended.
Well, it's a shame that there isn't footage to see that. Not to jump back around, but back into the late 80s and into the 90s, then finally you guys did go to the WWF. Hawk and Animal came first and started the program with Demolition. First, you weren't with them until a bit later when they opted to bring you in and reunite you. First, I was wondering, how were the seeds planted for Hawk and Animal to move to WWF, if you know, and were there any talks of you coming in when they debuted? And if there were, why did that plan change? If not, what happened that opened the door for you to come in? I think you debuted at WrestleMania that year, WrestleMania 8, and rejoined Hawk and Animal in WWF.
Yeah, that was kind of a, it was like a marriage that was on shaky ground at that time. We were under a contract with Crockett and Turner at that time, and we had been talking to Vince because this thing was going to be done in a year, and we were just trying to cut our best deal. And at that point, you're talking about 89, somewhere in there, right around 89, and it sort of looked like, Vince was going to win the wrestling war, and the guys, they really wanted to go to Vince because that's where the action seemed to be going. But my whole career was based on my integrity and my word. And when I signed the deal with Crockett, I signed for 3 years. And we had went in and we talked to him, and Crockett said, well, I'll let you guys walk away from the contract if you want. And so that opened the door for all of us. Or in my case, I said, no, I gave you my word. I'd stay here for 3 years. I'm going to stay because all of my life in wrestling, the only thing that mattered was my word was gold, because I was the manager of the Road Warriors. I was the manager. I was the last shooting manager. I booked all the matches. I worked out the planes. I worked out the hotel deals. I worked out our money, everything. So my word was gold. And if all of a sudden I backed out on a contract, where would my word be? Well, my word wouldn't mean anything. So I felt I had to finish out my contract with Crockett, which I did, and Turner. And then the guys, they left, and they went to Vince. So they were up there 1, maybe 2 years, I can't remember. And after I finished my contract with Vince, I took about a year off, and then I called Vince up and I said, if you want me, I'm willing to come in and help wherever I can. And so we worked out a deal, and then I got reunited with the guys.
Mr. Ellering, several years later, as your careers had all progressed, Hawk and Animal returned to WCW, World Championship Wrestling at this time, without you at their side. And this was during the Eric Bischoff Raw Nitro era, and then right after that, returned right back to Raw around 1997, also without you. And once again, you were brought back into the picture. When you did return to the WWF, the storyline actually saw you actually turned on them and joined and managed the DOA. Is there a specific reason for you not being alongside the Warriors in WCW or initially when they came back to WWF in 97? And also, whose idea was it for you to turn on them and actually join with the DOA at that time?
Well, that was totally Vince's idea. And, it was the guy, at that point, the guys were doing good, but they needed we just needed to kick, jump start it a little bit. So I went with DOA for a little while, but it was always with the assumption that I'd end back up with Animal and Hawk. And, because we started out together and we always had to end together. And wrestling and life, and it's like a marriage. You go through ups and you go through downs, and in the end, you just gotta weather the storms and come back together. Because that's what the people want to see, and that's where we started. And so it was just a chapter in the book. Yeah.
All right, Paul, we really appreciate you taking the time to sit down and speak with us here. This is going to be the last of the questions that we have for you. And again, just wanted to thank you for taking this time out of your schedule to do this. Lastly, in 2011, you had bestowed on yourself and the Road Warriors about the greatest honor in the wrestling industry when the three of you were enshrined and given your rightful spot in WWE's Hall of Fame. Take us through how that came about in 2011 and your feelings on the whole experience with the ceremony and WrestleMania weekend, if you could. And if you could fill us in on your current relationship with the company since that point and through the present.
Well, you know, to be inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame is a tremendous honor, and also at the same time that year we were inducted into the Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame in Amsterdam, New York. So both in 1 year was a tremendous honor, and you know, everything to do with the WWE and the universe that they have there is it's always first class, and Vince called and said, you know, you're going to be inducted into the Hall of Fame, and they just take care of you, first class, everything, first class seats down, limo at the airport, first class hotel, everything's paid for, and you know, they do it upright. They really take care of you, and it's a tremendous honor to be recognized by your peers. You know that you know, you're to be enshrined for forever into the Hall of Fame. It's just yeah, it's a pretty touching deal.
Yeah,
and then to be able to you know, to talk about Hawk, that meant the most to me. Yeah. You know,
we watched that recently, and we could see the emotion in both yours and Animal's kind of playing off each other when you were up on stage. That must have been an emotional moment.
Yeah, it was, you know, because we missed them. And, you know, we've been together for, well, at that time it was probably 28 years. We had our 20-year reunion in 2003, and they started in 83. And you know, that was in June in Chicago, and then Hawk passed away in October, and we just missed him, you know. Yeah, he was an awesome guy. He was the best of the best, and Hawk would give you a shirt off his back. I remember one time we were in New York City, right downtown there, by the 54th Street gym. And the gym was in an alley, and it'd go down the steps, and we went down the steps, and we worked out, and it was an old dungeon type gym. And we come out, and here's this, you know, a guy that's just down on his luck, and he's leaned up against the wall, sitting on the cement there, and you know, a homeless person, and Hawk just reaches into his pocket and gives him $50. You know, that's the way Hawk was. He just he was the best of the best. Yeah.
Certainly one of the greatest teams of all time, Precious Paul Ellering being the brains behind it. Paul, I can speak for both of us and all of our readers and followers at Wrestling's Glory Days when I say this has truly been an honor and a thrill to have you join us here this evening. As one of the greatest personalities and promo guys of the glory days of professional wrestling and of all time for that matter, I have just one parting request that I know we would all love to hear just once. If you wouldn't mind doing this for us, if you could transport yourself back, transport all of our readers back to maybe 1984 or 1985, right in the prime of Precious Paul Ellering and the Road Warriors running wild over everybody. Give us a quick promo.
'Tis the Precious Paul, the living doll, the master of disaster, the master blaster. From 8 to 80, the precious one drives all the ladies crazy. and the Legion of Doom, the greatest team of our time, the greatest team of all time. We make every team sign a contract before they enter the ring. It is enter at your own risk, because the bell will toll. It will toll for us going to the ring and for you leaving the ring.
Paul Ellering with us tonight on WGD Weekly. We want to thank you once again for joining us. Go out and visit him if you're up in Minnesota. What's the name of your bar again, Paul?
The Rock Tavern on Big Birch Lake.
Thank you once again, Mr. Ellering. Enjoy the rest of your evening. I want to say a special thank you while you're on the line here. You have an absolute wonderful first class. You certainly taught your children well. Rachel was just absolutely incredible helping us get this all set up. She's on her way to Florida this week for Powerlifting Nationals. Give us one little thing for her. Let us know how much you appreciate what she's done. Is she going to maybe make a future into the wrestling business as well?
Well, the door is there. You know, the door is there. You got to open the door, and then you got to walk through. And she knows that. She's a very disciplined person, and has tremendous talent, and she can go as far as she wants. So.
Once again, we thank you so much, Mr. Ellering. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yep, thank you.
Thank you.
There you have it, folks. Precious Paul Ellering took 30 minutes of his time, answered some of the greatest questions. We really, really appreciate his time. Gave us a little insight, Scum, on the last Battle of Atlanta. It's a wonderful question. I know a lot of people have multiple questions about that because there is no footage, and it was really good to hear someone that was actually maybe had the best seat in the house that day, hanging 20 feet above the cage, watching maybe the first Hell in a Cell style match that ever was.
Yeah, I mean, I remember that. Me and you had spoken about that, not that often, but, you know, I'd seen it on the Glory Days forum. People were talking about it, and you hit them with that question about war games, and, you know, we had a kind of a format there that we were following, and just so we didn't take up too much of Mr. Ellering's time, and I got thinking, geez, you know, there aren't many more matches that took place in a cage that are more legendary and almost fabled in that, you know, there's no footage. Nobody can see it. I remember when I was a kid, when I first started, like I had said, when I was asking him the question about Georgia Championship Wrestling, buying the old Pro Wrestling Illustrated. And one of the first ones I bought had a pictorial of that bloodbath between Wildfire Tommy Rich and Mad Dog Buzz Sawyer. And obviously I've never seen the match, but I just think it's one of those things that I didn't mean to stray from the format there, but I just figured, hey, you know, we got the man on the line. He was in a cage himself, on top of the cage. I mean, who could better recollect that match than him? I mean, than anybody, I would think. So, and what a great recollection it was. I mean, exactly what he said, what I remembered from those pictures and the ones I've seen since. I believe his exact comment was, man, that was a bloodbath. They killed each other, you know. So it was great, you know. What a thrill to have him on here and to have him talk to those things.
Absolutely.
Great stuff.
Answer the questions in a very straight format. And again, folks, if you're listening or if you're going to listen to the recording of this, keep in mind that we're running Wrestling's Glory Days, and we're all about, and the key word there is glory days of wrestling. There's a million places on the internet where you can go and find out who hates who and where the drama is and this and that. That's not what we're about here. We're all about the good times, the good stories, the photos, and the videos of the wrestling that we enjoyed growing up as kids. So as you listen to our show and we go down the road further, please understand that if you are looking for, I don't know what you would call it, Scum, I call it the dirt sheets or however, you know, whatever the case may be. I know there's a big market for that, but that's not what we're here for. We're here to reenact the glory days of professional wrestling. Our title says everything, and we go over what we do week to week, and we really appreciate everybody listening and reading our page, following us on Twitter, our Wrestling's G Days. Scum, I think that what we did tonight was something that I know you and I as wrestling fans, I think we've both been watching wrestling at least together, together since maybe the early 90s. I'm thinking 1990, what was WrestleMania 6? I think Warrior Hogan, that was, I think, the first year I really remember, like, immediately talking to you like, no way, Warrior won.
Yeah, I think that was 90. Yeah, I mean, a long time. I mean, like I was just saying, to have somebody like that, and again, like you said, props to his daughter, who is a Glory Days reader and follower, that kind of through interaction with you gave us this opportunity. And for the listeners and readers out there, without dropping any spoilers, as they say these days on those sheets that you were talking about, let's just say there's a few more irons in the fire in the near future that we've been working on. Hopefully we'll be able to do this again with some other interesting subjects that from the glory days of wrestling, which, you know, spans quite a long time. Steve, what I wanted to do, though, just while we're still on here, I'd certainly like to hear some more of what you thought, you know, as we kind of recap what Mr. Ellering had to say in the time we were on. I got to say, one of the most interesting things that I thought he said, again, everything was fantastic, and I'm sure after a listen back I'll think of a few more, but I thought it was really interesting when the question was posed that you asked him about the later years, the Nitro and Attitude Era, when the Road Warriors returned, 96, 7, and 8, about when he came back and managed the DOA. Because, again, you never know, like, who knows. I thought it was real interesting when you asked him whose idea it was, and it was Vince McMahon that had kind of planted the seed to break them apart, have him turn on the Road Warriors. I just wasn't expecting that. You know, I didn't know who it would be, but interesting. I you know, that, all right, he wasn't there to come back in, and then they bring him back in, and that, you know, obviously that must have been the plan that Vince had. Hey, this would be cool. What if we put Paul Ellering with a new team against the Road Warriors? Which, you know, I mean, whether it worked out as well as planned or not, debatable, but I mean, breathe some new life, like he said, just another chapter in the book, I think he said it was. But I found that really interesting. What I mean, there's plenty of other points, but what did you find it most interesting that he had to say?
Seems that's almost a page out of Vince McMahon's book, because he understands the big story and how great it would be. So not so much for that instant where he turns on the Road Warriors. It certainly would be great TV or a great pay-per-view to watch when the legendary team splits up, the manager goes one way and the team goes the other. But think about the return, because always down the line there's always going to be a resolution. And, of course, that would be somewhere down the way, Precious Paul reuniting with the Road Warriors, and I think that would have been something absolutely fantastic. So throughout that whole story, you know, Vince being the businessman, and I think that, you know, the terminology in the industry is seeing money. And I think that Vince having that broad spectrum and being able to kind of step back from maybe what you would traditionally think about, certainly a great idea. Have one of the most notorious teams, the, you know, trios, I guess you would say, because as we could see in watching some of these War Games, Precious Paul could bring it. I watched the War Games earlier this week, as a matter of fact, and Precious Paul was right in there pounding people with Hawk and Animal and Dusty and Nikita, and certainly didn't take one step back when he did it. And in the middle of the process, watching Hawk and Animal break J.J. Dillon's collarbone again, brings back some old memories there. But something that really stuck out to me, Scum, was when you asked who else, other than the Road Warriors, was someone that really stuck out in his mind as to who really brought it? Who was the guy that he really enjoyed working with? And Arn Anderson immediately, and I know you and I, huge Arn Anderson fans, because of all the guys from the NWA and World Championship Wrestling, Georgia Championship Wrestling, Arn Anderson, Tully Blanchard, the Horsemen, they had that sense of realness. They had that sense of they're going to look in the camera and we are going to whip your ass, and you believed it. And it was very believable. And I remember being a kid and knowing very, very much the difference between watching WWF programming, which was a little bit more over the top, a little bit more fantasy-based, and you kind of knew the characters were larger than life. But if you flipped on the TV at 6:05, you saw guys that were about 5'10" to 6 feet tall, about 220 pounds, tough guys that looked 35 years old in their prime, and they were ready to beat your ass. And at the top of that list was Arn Anderson. And still to this day, some of the most vicious maneuvers in the industry, the spine buster, that brain buster, even his DDT, every move that guy did was crisp, and it seemed like out of the ring he was a class act, someone I know that you and myself both enjoy. And I believe when we were at I think it was at WrestleMania 18 he did that run in. Am I correct? Is that when we were, I know we were on the show together. That was awesome.
Yeah, I remember that. And again, there's obviously that show was famous for the Hogan Rock match, and that was fantastic. But I know sitting there next to you among 70,000, 68,000, whatever it was, when that Flair Undertaker match, when all of a sudden the crowd popped like that, what's going on? And then Taker come off the ropes and Anderson popped in and hit that spine buster. That was fantastic. I mean, that was a great moment. I mean, and again, I know personally you and I have many different reasons, like you said, that Arn Anderson was one of the favorite. He just was believable. I mean, and that's pretty much what I think what part of what Ellering was getting at was just seems to be a guy who genuinely loved what he did, was out there for his love of what he was doing. And like you said, he wasn't a big bodybuilder. He wasn't a football player. He was a wrestler. And he went out there and he was about as good and believable when he talked, when he spoke a promo. He might have been alongside Flair, who brought the pomp and brought the circumstance, but Anderson was serious and believable that he was going to come out there and he was going to kick somebody's ass. And that was, the allure of him, which made him one of the greatest.
I can't agree with you more. You look at the team of Arn Anderson and Tully Blanchard, and I'm sure if you bellied up to a tavern somewhere and they were sitting next to you, you might make some small talk. And if you weren't a fan of the business, you would have no idea that these guys were two of the biggest names ever from the early '80s up and through now, being legends, being Hall of Famers. And it's just incredible to hear some of the stories from guys that walked that. I guess as Ric Flair would say, as they walked the aisle. Certainly, you want to look down the road at some of our future shows. And ladies and gentlemen, at WGD Weekly, we're going to bring you the best. When you join with Steve and the Scum, you're going to get this type of stories that Precious Paul Ellering gave to you. If you want to go back into our archives, Leilani Kai also spent a lot of time with us a few weeks back, had some great interview, answered some great questions. Anytime you guys want to leave us a question on the thread, we'll be happy to try to answer them for you. WGD Weekly with Steve and the Scum. We're super happy to have had Paul Ellering on today. Another special thank you to Rachel Ellering for getting this all put together. She certainly was the mastermind. I wonder if she walks around with a Wall Street Journal.
You can only hope. I was going to say you can only hope that Rachel Ellering, if she does break in, that Paul saved a set of those spiked shoulder pads for her. Maybe some face pad. I don't know that she'd be interested in the hairstyle, but would be interesting to have a Road Warrior in the Divas division, right?
Absolutely, and you got to figure that James Laurinaitis, who's an absolute animal middle linebacker, son of Road Warrior Animal, running a pretty vicious and up-and-coming defense. Keep an eye out for them if you're a pro football fan this year. I think the Rams are really going to take a step forward, and I think James Laurinaitis is going to be right in the middle of it. I would see down the road, and this, honestly, Scum, this is how this whole thing started. Was earlier this week, I was just kind of strolling through some images that I had saved away, and there was a really good one, I believe, came out of Sports Illustrated with Road Warrior Animal and his son, and they had kind of reversed roles where Animal was wearing a Rams jersey and had the helmet, and his son had the Road Warrior paint, and we made a comment just in passing, kind of jokingly, that it would be great to see him in the World Wrestling Entertainment along with Rachel Ellering, maybe as a side or, again, as a diva in there knocking people out. And I think that would just be something incredible to see down the road, something to really look forward to. Scum, this is great. WGD Weekly, please join us every week. We're going to give you the best in classic wrestling. Scum, is there anything else you wanted to bring to the table?
Well, a couple things that I wanted from that interview with Mr. Ellering. First off, I thought that it spoke volumes. Now, imagine being in his shoes in the late 80s when everybody, as he was saying, saw the writing on the wall and wanted to jump over to WWF with Vince. And and it's the Road Warriors. And like he said, he was the real manager, not on screen. He was booking hotels, and he was watching the finances, and he was a legitimate manager, like a rock band would have a manager or something, not just on screen like running in and getting thrown into the ring and beat up by the good guy. He was their manager. So they are allowed out of their contract, and because he's that truthful to his word, he stays. He just doesn't do anything until the contract's up, and then he rejoins them. I think, again, you and I, we're not wrestlers. We're not out there. We're fans. But from any recollection that you would hear, or in any walk of life, when that kind of money is out there, and you're that true to your word, I think that says a lot about a person. I think that's rare in any business, and it just, I mean, I'm sure from recollections you or any of our listeners have heard, I think it's, at least as lore would have it, it's especially rare in the business that they're in. I just think that spoke a lot for what kind of a guy he is. I mean, the fact that he took the time out of his schedule on a Sunday night at his place of business to speak with us, I think it's fantastic, and speaks to, you know, what, and he said several times what the fans meant to him and what they meant to the Road Warriors throughout their career. I just wanted to say it appeared not only were we excited as fans of his to bring that to our followers and to our readers, but, man, I mean, the guy just, I can't say it, seemed like a really great guy, seemed like a real class act. And again, the other thing I was going to say is I thought it was real, you know, he on the phone here with us, he got kind of emotional, even remembering when they were talking about Hawk at the Hall of Fame, and, you know, that story that he brought up about, you know, you don't hear things like that often. I mean, Road Warrior Hawk, by all recollections, one of the greatest of all time, definitely part of the greatest tag team of all time. I mean, I remember watching Hawk when pay-per-view first started, main event in the Bunkhouse Stampede in a title match against Flair. I mean, he did his stuff on his own on occasions and was marketable and sellable. But, you know, to hear a story like that, they're walking out of a gym and here's this guy in need and he just pulls out and hands him a 50 spot. I mean, you know, you don't hear stuff like that. And I look forward to doing more things like this, you know, and I know you do too, Steve, that to bring that kind of, you know, view of these performers and these larger-than-life personalities to the listeners and to the followers of Wrestling Glory Days and whoever's tuning in, because, you know, I think, like you said, a lot of times you get someone out there and what you get is people looking for, like, all right, who was doing this wrong, or who was stabbing who in the back, and who cares? You know, I think I would much rather hear the stories that we just heard about the great matches, the great feuds, and the great times in wrestling from one of the greatest managers of all time than I would who, you know, didn't pay him for a card that he worked on in 1975. Right? I mean,
you couldn't have said it better. Absolutely, Scum. But, you know, as we're talking about this, I think that if you're a young person listening to this, and as someone, if you didn't watch growing up, if you didn't have the Road Warriors and Paul Ellering in your living room at 6:05 on Saturday nights, you know, as you mentioned, and as Precious Paul Ellering mentioned, have integrity. It goes a long way. Look at what integrity and keeping your word got Paul Ellering. He's a Hall of Famer. He's one of the most celebrated and most popular wrestling personalities of all time, and there's no question to be asked. There's no debate there. That may be the message of the night here, is have some integrity, keep your word, think about what you're going to do, and don't just run because of, you know, greed, or you think the grass is greener on the other side of the fence. It may not always be the case. Have some patience, hone your craft, whatever it may be, and I think that's something that Precious Paul Ellering, WWE Hall of Famer, was able to give to us tonight, and I can't say thank you enough to him, to Rachel Ellering, and to the WGD staff, quite frankly. They will let me post 3 or 4 things on this, and I know we got almost a dozen, and I'm going to include you as a semi-honorary staff member here. That's going to round us out to a dozen, and it would be very selfish of me to not say thank you to each and every one of those guys, and I'm going to say every one of their names right now. We have Matt Pender, who's the executive producer for this show. We have Dan and Tommy, the Warner brothers, who are the founders of that page. I want to say thank you to all 3 of them very, very much. Charles, the Hall of Fame curator, he does a great job. David, Cal, Chris, our new guy, Savage. This guy brings it. I don't know if you read any of his stuff. He certainly has a different outlook on things, and I really, really have enjoyed some of the stuff that he's done. I think I mentioned Cal, Ron from Down Under. We have all these guys, and it's just so amazing to see everybody's different points of view, and I just wanted to say thank you to each and every one of them. They do a great job on the page. They really bring it. They love professional wrestling and classic professional wrestling at its best. Guys, join us at WGD Weekly Podcast. We're here on a weekly basis if we can. I know that we're both busy guys, but we're going to try to get you out something a weekly. Future guests, like you said, we're not going to spill the beans. Tune into us when we're on. You'll see those posts on Wrestling's Glory Days. Give us a follow on Wrestling's G Days on Scum. It was a great pleasure and an honor again to be working with you. It's about time to sign off. Is there anything you want to leave us with?
Yeah, just on the heels of what you said, we're not going to give anything away free. If we could get back to the Scheme Gene era, maybe we'll fire up 1-900, call the Scum, and you can get the hotline information. How's that? And then we'll. I got to say, it was a little bit of a thrill to hear when he first signed on, and you introduced me to hear Ellering give a little question to the Scum, like, anyone ever throw the word bag on the end of that name? Yeah, that's happened on occasion. And then that promo that he tossed in there at the end, I got to admit, some of that Tower of Power and the Precious One that's getting all the girls, that might be going right in the act, Steve.
Well, I'll tell you what, you're going to be able to hear that loud and clear on a weekly basis because I'm going to go ahead and hit my audio laboratory when we're done recording here, and I'm going to make that a commercial for us and maybe even an intro because that was second to none. First class act all the way around. Precious Paul Ellering. Thank you so much again for joining us, ladies and gentlemen, at WGD Weekly. On behalf of the Scum, this is Steve signing off saying, what a rush. We appreciate it, and we'll see you soon.
Good night.